Hey everybody, hope you're all having a great day today. Welcome to Real Mob Stories. This is your host, James Proctor. Today we're going to talk about Sammy the Bully Gravano and how he likes to bully and go after women and how he's spreading more lies. We do have a mob story to cover today, and we'll go into the details of a tragic series of events that took place in 1981 where two men were taken out, including the boyfriend of Linda Gotti. We'll go into examples of how Sammy Gravano uses his platform to go after women and how it just shows the character of a person who's never changed. Please do me a favor and hit the like button and consider subscribing to Real Mob Stories with James Proctor. Without further delay, on to our feature presentation. So today, I was listening to Sammy Gravano. He had his Monday live show, and, as he does on occasion, he starts talking out of his ass. And so, there are a few things I wanted to talk about. I also noticed that he moved out of the warehouse that he had been living in to he said, a place in a gated community. Apparently he's meeting with Hollywood types still with the hope of having a scripted show. So I know that, he continues to be working on that. But for whatever reason, he started to go after the Gottis. I don't even know why he brought them up, to be honest. So he first talks about John Gotti destroying the mob, a subject that's frankly getting old. And I've repeatedly said that it wasn't John Gotti that destroyed the mob. It wasn't even Sammy Gravano. It was really the government finally realizing how to use the tool of RICO to put crime bosses away, even if they weren't involved in the crimes directly they're accused of. The commission trial, which took place in 1985, which was actually 5 years before John Gotti was arrested for the final time, is what I see as a catalyst for what created the changes and the, what I'd say the downfall of modern Cosa Nostra. Of course, the radio night tapes were damning, but it was John Gotti and Frank Licasio that went down for those tapes. Sammy Gravano becomes an informant and testifies against them. Sammy testified in a few more trials over the years after he became an informant, and we know what happens to him. He moves out to Arizona. He gets his wife, daughter, and son involved in an ecstasy ring that resulted in Sammy being put behind bars for nearly 20 years. And now his family has criminal convictions. Gerard was in for 10 years, something like that, at least a few years. And then, his wife and daughter have convictions. So my question is, what man would want to get his family involved in the narcotics trade? So bad that Sammy threatened to take out his own son. He also made threats against his wife, accusing her of stealing money. And, I know that's all old news, but what all this tells me is that Sammy has not changed, and he'll continue to do what he can to try and change his legacy and history. So, I'm going to bring you the truth. I'm going to bring you the facts, and, I'll prove to you that what Sammy said in many cases today on his live, wasn't true. So if you speak with Rudy Giuliani, he'll actually say that the Joe Bonanno book, Men of Honor, was instrumental in preparing for the commission trial against the bosses of the five families. You had the Wiretaps and the Jaguar of the Casey boss, Tony Dux Corallo, recording his conversations with Salvatore Avellino. You also had FBI agent Joe Pistone infiltrating the Bonanno family, and he was involved in recording conversation, giving information to the feds for 5 years until 1981. That wasn't part of the commission trial, but what happened with Joe Pistone actually was another catalyst, another thing that hurt the mob. All those things were more instrumental in the destruction of the mob than what happened with John Gotti. So the tactics of the U.S. government changed, and they were allowed to get court-ordered wiretaps, and they had RICO. So the whole point of this is that the commission trial in RICO did much more to bring the mob down than what happened to John Gotti. So regarding Sammy Gravano on his live today, he had several disgusting statements. He called Angel Gotti a junkie. And that's the furthest from the truth. Is Angel Gotti, she's never done drugs. She doesn't drink alcohol. She's a great mother and grandmother. I talked to Angel today, and she was telling me how her father was so much against drugs and basically threatened her and said, if you do drugs, you'll disappear, because he was that much against, people around him, doing drugs. We know that, Anthony Ruggiano, he wasn't allowed to come around when he was doing drugs. Same thing with Tony Roach. So, but for Sammy Gravano to slander the name of Angel Gotti, he should be ashamed of himself. He has no shame. He has no ability to muzzle his mouth, and he just has to go after the people he doesn't like. And my big problem with what Sammy is saying is it's not true. And it's just disgusting, in my opinion, for him to go after a woman. Was he not raised the right way to treat women with dignity and respect? I can't understand people thinking it's okay to slander women and say these disgusting comments. A real man does not behave that way. Real men don't bully and attack women. You'll never see me on here attacking women. I don't care what they say, what they do. I'm not going to do it. I was brought up much different than that, but nothing surprised me what Sammy Gravano will say. However, Angel Gotti's not the only woman that Sammy has gone after on his show. On his Our Thing podcast, Sammy Gravano actually dedicated a big portion of one of his shows talking about and making fun of Victoria Gotti, who was John Gotti's wife and the mother of Angel. Sammy had a home improvement company. They did some work on John Gotti's kitchen, and Victoria was not happy with the workmanship. So, they get a hold of Sammy. Sammy comes to the house, and his crew, makes things right with the kitchen. And then on the show, on the podcast, Sammy kept on saying that Victoria was crazy and was emotional, but doesn't he remember that when all this went down, it was in 1980, and it wasn't too long after little Frankie was run over and killed by a neighbor. Of course, she's going to be upset and emotional. Could he not show some human decency and compassion? The show he did on Victoria was just disgusting. And let's talk about Linda Milito, the wife of Sammy Gravano's so-called best friend, Louie Milito. Gravano tested. So if for those that don't know what happened, Sammy testified in his court. So he actually talks about it in his book and also in testifying in court. He set up Louie Milito to be killed. He told a falsehood saying that that John Gotti wanted them to go kill Johnny Gamarano. That was the plan. And, the thing is that by this point in time, Louie Milito and Gravano weren't getting along. And so he wasn't going to just show up if there wasn't a reason. And the thing was, he knew that John Gotti hated Johnny Gamarano, and Gravano said that John was always bad mouthing him and talking about him, and Louie believed it right away that they were going to take out this guy. And what got Louie in trouble or in bad graces with Sammy Gravano was that he apparently had cozied up to Tommy Bilotti and Paul Castellano. And was at the worst possible moment. It was right before John Gotti killed the both of them. And if you remember, Milito himself was in prison when this transition took place, from Paul Castellano to Gotti becoming boss. And apparently Gravano said that he found out from Frank DeCicco that Milito had been partnering with Tommy Bellotti, and they were partners in the Shylock business. So we're told that Frank DeCicco was upset. He said that he wanted Louie Milito killed. We know Frank DeCicco gets blown up in April of '86. So that happened before Milito got out. And then, according to Gravano, he's saying that he wanted to give him a pass initially. Basically put him on the shelf, tell him that he had to stay in his own neighborhood. He could do Shylocking or whatever, but couldn't come around. That's what he's saying. But then we find out from Gotti's lawyer, Albert Krieger, that it was Gravano that actually profited from the murder of Milito. And what happened was that after Milito's 1988 murder, Gravano took over Milito's company, Jim Steel, and he drained it of hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to the attorneys. And then when you look at Gravano's and his wife's tax returns, it showed that Gravano had taken more than $1 million from the company during the 18 months after he took over Jim Steel, after Milito was killed. So we know what happened to Jim Steel. We know what happened to the Shylocking business. And now we have the situation where Sammy Gravano talked to Linda Milito. He's saying, oh, I'm going to find out who did this to him, and all that. And then he gave her, I believe, $1,000. But then after that point in time, he refused to talk to Linda Milito anymore. And the thing is that, none of the money that Louie had on the street went to Linda Milito or, anyone in Louie's family. It went to Sammy Gravano. And then we have on Sammy's podcast that he goes after Linda Milito. He calls her ugly and crazy, all that kind of stuff. And my thought is, how can you talk about a woman who lost her husband like that? Of course she's going to be upset. She finds out it was Sammy that was responsible for his death. And, it's pretty apparent that he killed Louie Milito to get his Shylock business and Jim Steel. And we see he profited on it. And all that Linda got from all that was, $1,000. So then we can go on to the murder of Alan Kaiser. I know we've talked about that a lot of times, but Gravano lied when he said he apologized to Joy Faraci and the family. Never has Sammy Gravano apologized to the family. Alan Kaiser was a 16-year-old boy. He wasn't part of that lie. And his only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And finally, I have the truth about what happened to Linda Gotti and the double homicide that took place. Sammy Gravano talks about Linda Gotti being a rat, and also talks about how supposedly Anthony Ruggiano showed him an article proving that she ratted. But Sammy lied about Linda Gotti testifying. She never testified, and I have the proof of that. So we're going to go over what happened in 1981, and then also 30 years later when Linda was willing to testify. You got to understand, Linda Gotti's a woman. She was 19 years old at the time. She was not in that lie. She was there and saw her boyfriend shot and killed in front of her. She was hysterical. So yeah, she did talk to the police, but how does that make her a rat? She's not under any oath, unlike Sammy Gravano, who disgraced the oath. So here's what happened. We go back to 1981. There's two men drinking there at Shamrock Bar. Shamrock was on Jamaica Avenue in Richmond Hill, Queens. And they were gunned down by, mob guys right in the middle of the establishment. You had a guy named Richard Gotkin, and then his business partner, John Diagnosy. So they were shot to death in 1981, supposedly over John accidentally spilled a drink that landed on the dress of Gambino mobster Frank Riccardi's girlfriend. According to the New York Daily News, they said that 3 mobsters beat the rap due to bungling prosecutors and reluctant witnesses. And then finally, we find out in March of 2013 that the key shooter was actually Bobby Glass's Bernacchi. He was responsible for the shooting, and this was on what was called Western Night at the Shamrock Bar. So when the shooting happened in 1981, Linda Gotti did talk to the police initially, when it happened, when they came to the Shamrock Bar, but then she never went back to testify. But then, 30 years later, she made the decision that, she wanted to, talk. And so, the FBI agents had been, talking with Linda Gotti through the years, and they finally convinced her that, that she should, talk about it, and so she was going to identify the men who killed her boyfriend, John. And then you had the bartender. He was an Irish guy named Patrick Sullivan. He had previously backed out as well back in 81, but he's also going to testify now in 2013. They said this guy, Richard, he was a decorated Vietnam veteran. He had 4 children with his wife at the time of his death. And so what they also said that their charges were dropped against an alleged killer, Ronnie the Jew Barlin, because Linda Gotti recanted her identification. And what they also said was that in 1998, there was a state murder rap, and they said Bobby Glasses beat that rap. And then Riccardi was tried separately in a state court and also was acquitted, but Riccardi died in 2007. So anyway, decades had passed. This happened back in 1981, and now Linda Gotti and Joseph Sullivan were ready to tell the jury what they knew. But in the end, Linda Gotti never took the stand. It was only Sullivan that took the stand. And what Sullivan said is that he testified that he had lied during the state trial about Bobby Glass's role in the murders because he was scared of retribution. And according to the FBI, the eyewitness testified in the federal case that he had recognized all 3 assailants, but he had been afraid to testify against them because, in his words, 2 men were dead over a spilled drink. And I think that was reason enough to be afraid. And so Bobby Glasses, who launched his career in the mob in the early 70s, he ended up serving on the 3-member ruling panel overseeing the Gambino family in the early 2000s. He was arrested in 2011 as part of a FBI sweep. There was in this, it wasn't related specifically to what happened at the Shamrock Bar, but it was just, a national sweep over the mob. So there's 100 different mobsters and associates that got arrested in 2011. But they said that in 1981, after the murders, Bobby Glasses had went into hiding. Then he returned years later. Then he got made into the Gambino crime family. And what we know about Bobby Glasses is that he had a pretty large crew. It was real profitable. They did a lot of loan shark and Shylock and gambling, that type of stuff. And they were based in a Cooper Avenue cafe that was in Glendale, Queens. And so what we find out about Bobby Glasses is that he does eventually get sentenced to life in prison for the killing. Sullivan's testimony was instrumental in that. He was found guilty on on 9 racketeering acts. Also, the 2 murders. He's convicted of heroin trafficking, robbery, loan sharking, and illegal gambling. And what's ironic was that the feds had actually offered a plea deal for Bobby Glasses, and he would have been able to get out in only 12 years if he'd accepted, because the feds were thinking that this is a cold case. This is like from 1981, the murders, and so the feds just wanted to get the conviction. But at the time, Bobby Glasses said no way. But on the eve of the trial, Bobby Glasses said that he was reconsidering and wanted the 12-year sentence, but the Fed said the agreement was no longer an option. So, like I said, he goes to prison for life. Linda Gotti never testified on that trial. It was the guy, Joseph Patrick Sullivan, the bartender, that actually testified. And like I said, that the guy John was Linda's boyfriend at the time, and she saw him gunned down in front of her. So, that's what happened, and so she never testified. So Sammy was totally wrong on what he said, and in my opinion, the woman was 19 years old. She wasn't in that life. She never took an oath. So, I'm not going to hold that against her, that she was, that she spoke with the cops. But like I said, she never testified in any court trial over that. So that's all I have for you today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about Sammy Gravano. What do you think about Linda Gotti? Was she wrong for talking with the police? And why does Sammy Gravano like to bully and go after women? It just really bothers me to see what Sammy says about these women, especially as it's full of hateful lies. And like I said earlier, Angel Gotti is my friend, and I know for a fact she's not a junkie. She never was. I just want that out there for the record. So until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless you always.